from the Åland witch trials. And I think, well, sometimes I think it's because someone, perhaps God, wanted us to really know what happened at the trials. So, or the women themselves were so eager to be declared innocent afterwards, so they somehow managed to save the papers. The Åland Island, the trials on Åland Islands are kind of spectacular, and also they are comparing to the witch trials in Europe and the rest of the Sweden. Finland and Åland were a part of Sweden during that days. The Åland trials stand out because we had a judge on Åland that was educated in Dorpat, in Tartu, at the university there, and they almost had like an own class for the witch students, for those who wanted to hunt witches. They learned about witches, how to find them, and how to get rid of them. So when he came, he was from Sweden. When he came to Åland Islands, 1656, he immediately started to try to find witches in Åland. And you can see that in the protocols from the court. In 1664, although the farmers that was sitting in the court, they didn't believe him, and they tried to keep him short and say, "Oh no, there's no witches here. It's only ordinary people trying to use some innocent sorcery to get through the life, to get food to the cows, to make the cows wealthy, and to get more milk and butter for the children." And in 1664, Nils Psylander managed to get a note in the sentence of a woman and her nephew who were convicted for sorcery, and Psylander said that you cannot be sure that the devil wasn't involved. And this was a very important note, because the difference between being convicted for sorcery and being convicted for sorcery with a contract with the devil was death. If you couldn't prove that the devil had been involved, you couldn't sentence the woman to death. Well, in 1664, this judge managed to get that note in the protocols that we cannot be sure that the devil wasn't, in fact, took part in this. And then, in 1666, there was a poor woman called Karin from Emkarby, and she stood trial because she had accused the son of a farmer to be a thief. And of course the farmer didn't like that, so he accused this Karin of false rumors, and she had to go to trial. And this Karin was kind of odd. She was begging around in the villages. I think she perhaps saw it as a good thing, and perhaps good for her affairs, to be, if people were a little bit scared of her, and if people thought that she could see things that no other could see, and so on, so they could perhaps give her some money, and she could tell them truths about things that they didn't know about. And when she stood trial, she suddenly started to confess that she had since she was a child, I have to look in my notes now. Since she was a child, she had been disturbed by the devil, or had contact with the devil in several ways. Well, Nils Psilander was really happy about this. Suddenly he had this real witch in front of him, and everything that he had tried to convince the farmers in Åland about the latest 10 years was suddenly a truth. So Karin was, in the spring of 1666, Karin from Emkarby was sentenced to death for witchcraft and sorcery, and for making a contract with the devil. This was in April 1666, and when they asked Karin about other women that might be witches, she said, well, she knew about three other women that could be witches, all of them already dead. Well, she was brought to Kasterholm, to the castle of Kasterholm, and kept there. And a lot of people came, even traveling from Finland and Sweden, to see her, to meet with her, and to ask her questions. I think it was almost like if we suddenly sat here and there was a person from March landing in the sofa. We could ask, any questions about life on March. And she was asked, and she was also, I guess, they threatened her and did treat her hard. So when in August, May, June, July, 4 months later, she had accused 13 other women on Åland for being witches. And they were all called to the to the court in Kasterholm and asked if Karin was true. And all of them, of course, said very firstly, they said, no, damn no, we are no witches. 2 of them were put in the jail for further investigation. The others could go home, bailing themselves out of jail. And 2 days later, Karin was executed. One of the women who was accused by Karin was Lisbeta from the village Persnäs, the farm called Skarpans. And she was a little bit different because she was wealthy. She lived on a great farm, and she came from an honorable family. But she was accused on 13 different points, or 13 different ways of misusing her knowledge about things. This picture shows it's from 1650, and it shows the farm Skarpans where she lived. And on the right, in the middle of the picture, but on the right, north of the sea or the lake there is a mill. And the funny thing is that one of the things she was accused for was that she had met the devil behind her mill, and came to talk with him, speak with him, and agreed on taking his help to fix some things, and instead she should give him butter swept in a piece of cloth. She should give him every year a piece of butter. This is also from the village of Persnäs. It's a very special place. Near the castle, It's almost about perhaps 2 kilometers. It's the church of Sund, the parish Sund, and in that church there was the priest Brynjel Kjellinus. This is Brynjel Kjellinus and his family in 1670, painted during the witch trials. And Brynjel Kjellinus was known to be good at handling those women that sat in jail accused of being witches. And he even, the procedure in every case was that first you got sentenced, and when you had been sentenced, you were put in jail in Kasterholm. And when you did sit in the jail waiting for your death, waiting for your execution, the priest came to you, not to comfort or read the Bible, but to ask you more questions and get more knowledge out of you. And in the case of Lisbeta, he was handling her so hard in the jail and threatening her to if she didn't give him the witch hazel that the devil had given her to put on the broom or an animal or something like that, and to be able to fly to Blåkulla, to the Blue Hill, to him, to his party in Blåkulla. If she didn't give him that witch hazel, he should burn down her house when she was dead. And she had small kids. She was still breastfeeding her youngest kid when this happened. So of course she didn't want that to happen. But she was very clever and smart. So one night she saw that the wife of the urcher, the guard, had a cow horn with shoe shine in it, some kind of grease to put on the shoes. So she stole some of that grease and she sewed it in her blouse. She made a little parcel and put it inside her in the blouse. And then she gave it to the priest, to Brynjel Kjellinus, and said, this is my witch hazel, here it is. And he was really happy, so he did the same for the next woman who was known to be the most honorable woman in the parish, and the farmers in the court refused to torture her. She was old and she was a widow, she was lonely, and Lisbeta helped her and stole some more of that grease from the guard's wife and sewed it into her hat. She had a cap of some kind. And they gave that to Brynjel Kjellinus, who was even more happy about that. But the guard's wife, her name was Christine. Christine, she had seen this, but she didn't want to tell anyone. And this says a lot about what human in the society thought about the witches, I think. I don't think she dared to openly help them, but she didn't either want to make it worse for them. So she said nothing at first about this, that she knew that they had stolen her shoe shine grease. But then she discovered that this Brynjel Kjellinus, he was treating the following woman even harder when she didn't give him the witch hazel. Now he was, convinced that they all had this. He had got it from two women. Why shouldn't the other ones had got some kind of witch hazel from the devil? And when Kirsten saw this, she couldn't keep quiet anymore. So she had a friend who was married to the sheriff, and she went to the sheriff's wife and she said, well, I know that the witch hazel, or the thing that the priest think is the witch hazel, it's my own shoe grease. And then there, of course, came to some discussions, and there was another court called together, and the farmers in the court said, this is ridiculous. I mean, this means that we have tortured this woman to that point that they tell us anything. Now we can't believe in anything they have said. Nothing can be true, and we cannot judge more women on all those things that they have said, because we force them to say things, and we succeed in forcing, but not in getting the truth. And this was kind of a turning point. It didn't immediately stop the executions, but the courts did be more hesitating in judging or in sentencing to death. And it didn't take very, very long before it all, the Ålanders did stop executing witches. This is handcuffs. That was the method they used to torture the women. This picture, in fact, it's an old picture, and it's upside down, I have been taught, so you could think it on the other way. The screws were on the lower side of the hands. And they put them on, and then they screwed them harder and harder, turned them harder and harder, until they could even break bones inside your hands. And there is, for example, this Lisbeta, who was, the protocols say that she was brave and very talkable. She could talk for herself. And there is one time when they tried to torture her, and they have to stop because they couldn't turn it hard enough. They have to leave it for reparation to get it more useful to torture. And when the women were sentenced and then brought to the execution, it was the execution site where at Färgsund, that I don't know if you've been in Åland, you have probably passed Färgsund, that there's a short tunnel in the rock, and then there's a bridge over the water. It's the most central place in Åland, and that's why they put the execution site there. This is a map from 1650 showing, you can see there, it says Rätteplatz. It's in the middle up. Can you see it? It's above the water. And here is a postcard from the same place. You see the dotted line, brown line, that's where the bridge today reaches. And the red cross is the place where the execution site were. Everybody, they got their head cut off with the axe, and then burnt when they were dead. No one in Åland Islands were burnt alive. And the executioner was from Åbo, from Turku. We had no own executioner in Åland, and he was very clear. He told the court that he did not like to come to Åland to execute only one woman at a time. That was very uncomfortable for him. So if they could please keep them in the dungeon in Kasterholm and until there were more women convicted, so he could take them all in the same time. And in fact, I think the first, Karin was executed on her own in August 66, and then the next 4 women were probably executed on the same day in the early April of 1667. And after that, there were 2 more women executed. Any questions so far, or comments? Do you understand what I say at all? Good. One of the things that kind of hurts about the witches, I think, is that if you go to the churches in Åland, there's a lot of monuments and memories of the men who killed them, the powerful men who did the executions or made the sentences, and even the one who tortured them. This one is from the sheriff has given this masterpiece to the church in Sund, my home parish and his home parish too, to keep his honorable life forever remembered and praise God and so on. It's written on that globe down on the, and also paintings and so on. But the women who were killed, murdered, I should say, they have no, there's no visible memory of them in Åland Islands. I'm trying now to work for some kind of monument in near the execution site, so people could have. People are also asking me for that, so they would like to have a place where they could go and remember those women and every woman in the world still today who is suffering from violence and unfair sentences. Okay, something to say? Yes?
Do I need to? Shortly, I wanted to just ask that after the 1667, there wasn't any murders or executions after that?
They didn't really stop, because in 1668 there was one woman, and she was one of them that Karin had accused. It was the last one on the list that she had accused. And then in 1670 there was a woman who had been, and this is almost like a fairy tale, she had been accused by an army officer and a nobleman who stayed in Åland, Johan Bergenstierna, for having poisoned his wife with an apple with poison in it. You know, it's almost like a fairy tale. And she was, that was kind of a tragical thing, because she was executed without having the sacraments. The other woman, when they plead themselves guilty, or they said, okay, I did it, they got the sacraments. But this Margareta didn't, because she refused to say that she had, she admitted to have done something, some bad things, but she refused to admit to all of the accusations. So she didn't get any sacraments before she died. Yes. Okay. Okay. Great. Very fun.
I will run. I wanted to ask if there's some general way to check or to check if how were these women accused? Was it only about a accused them, and about the nobility, if the nobler person accused, then they're faulty? Or was there any kind of way, what did they do to get this accusation?
Well, there was a really certain way to get proof that they had connected to the devil, and that was that everyone that had connected to the devil and you know got in his company had this devil mark. And what do you say? Everyone that was accused also had a devil mark, because that devil mark could look just like anything. If you had hit something the day before, or if your kitten had bite you, or if you did have some scars from when you were a kid, anything of that could be a devil's mark. And if you had a devil's mark, you for sure was a witch. So that was one thing that connected them, but it was a construction. It was, you know, it was made up. In Åland we had no, yes, we had one woman who was tried with a needle. And they pointed a needle in her, in what they thought was a mysterious mark on her back. And then they said, well, she doesn't feel anything. We're putting the needle in. As soon as we say, now we are putting the needle in, she screamed. And then again, when we tried and said nothing, she didn't say anything. So that was one of those classic witch trial tests that we had on Åland, but only once. They didn't throw anyone in the water, for example. That's also common in other places, but not in Åland. No.
So, any of these women killed then, there is no it wasn't about sorcery or witchcraft at all.
No, it was about
these women.
No, they weren't, except for one. They weren't, you know, known as witches or wise women or anything like that. One of them, who was killed in 1668, she was known as a healer. She had been a wife of a boatswain, and she had traveled quite a lot. So she knew things that they used, for example, in Germany to heal wounds and illnesses and so on. And but otherwise, it was people were using sorcery everywhere, and there is even an example when the farmers in the court says, the courtmen, the farmers in the court, I mean the courtmen, because it was farmers who were sitting. Even when they said that, well, that kind of sorcery we have used at home for several years now. I mean, they even admitted that they themselves did. But this Nils Tillander has this really strong idealism. He really wanted to find witches, and of course, when you really want to find a witch, you do. And he used the law to really press them and to make them victims. He was I think he was an evil man, in fact. There was no good in him. I can understand that priest a little bit better, because he was Brynäs Kjellinus. He was at least believing in something and trying to do his best. But the people didn't like him. There's a story in my home parish, Sund, that when Brynäs Kjellinus died, the church was hit by the lightning. You know, devil comes to take his soul back. But Nils Tillander was evil. He really wanted to he wanted to make bad things. And he wanted to have power. And he used evil to get power. That's my belief. And you needed sorcery because you had no medicines and you had no knowledge. So when the cow got sick, you needed sorcery to help her. And some of the sorcery even could be, you know, it could be some truth in it or some scientific in it too. Lisbeta, for example, she had a toothache, and she tried to cure it by mixing up the foam on running water in the spring. There's foam, and to mix that with the first straws, the first sprout of rye that she could find in the spring, because she had been taught that could help to put on the teeth so that it wouldn't ache anymore, and she did so. And it didn't help because the teeth fell out. But she was accused of that too. That was, you know, witchcraft. But I have read somewhere now, just a couple of years ago, that foam on the water, it consists some kind of, what is yeast in English? Yeast, to make yeast, yes. Some kind of yeast. Some kind of yeast, and also the sprouts of rye early in the morning is very dynamic, and it could have some kind of paracetamol-ish thing in it. So if you connect or if you mix together some foam and some rye sprout, it perhaps helped, and it probably felt better at the moment at least. Yes.
So, was there any kind of like specific reason that it was these women that were accused, or was it just random and because someone decided to accuse them for just some random reason, or did they have something in common, or like what was there like a reason?
Not funny, but there's a odd thing about the women in Åland. Well, one thing is people often believe that it was the poor women and perhaps missing women that were accused, but also farmers' wives and even priests' wives could be accused by the people, or suspicion. But in Åland, there is this one thing that Karin gave the first list. And that list with the 13 women, it contains women of every kind and every place in the society. But I think, well, she was poor. She had been walking around in the villages. She had seen things and heard things. People had perhaps treated her bad. They had spit on her or tell her to go away. They didn't want her by their house. So I think she just, took the opportunity to, if there was someone she really didn't like and who had threatened her bad, she just took the chance to get back on her. And I don't think, because this is also important, because before Karin was sentenced to death, there was no witch who had been sentenced to death for 100 years in Åland. So Karin didn't know. I think she was, of course she realized it was not a good situation to be in, but I don't think she really understood that she was going to die, and she didn't really understand that those women that she accuses are going to get hell out of it. She was just, talking around and didn't understand how serious it was.
And then they just got the confessions out of them, and
Yes.
there was nothing else.
No.
Just that she had said it, and they forced them to confess. Yeah.
And they kind of, made it all up. And it's also very clear that this Silander, he had read he also bought really modern books. He had really good modern books about witchcraft. And, and he was asking questions from the literature. And when he had asked, he didn't ask, tell me about Blåkulla. He said, well, you went to Blåkulla, didn't you? Okay. At last you have to say yes. Well, was there a blue fire in Blåkulla? At last then you had to say yes. Did you fly there? I mean, he put words in their mouth. So every confession looked the same. And when every confession looked the same, even more stronger they believed in them. Because how could they know? Who told them? Well, Silander told them, in fact, how it should look in Blåkulla, how it should be there. So it was all a kind of, it was all made up. And it when you look at it, it's clear now to see how silly how it just, went mad, and nothing but madness could come out of it.
Tool of misogyny.
Yeah, also, yeah. In the beginning, at least, yes.
Time was already to, or was it connected with land owning? How easy was it to take land from women who were sentenced, who were beheaded? Or they couldn't own land, only men could own land at that point?
Well, they were living on farms, so their family took the land. No one took the land, if that's what you mean. No, they didn't take their belongings or their land. They just threatened to burn out their houses. And that is not unusual either, to use the house as, for the fire to burn the body. You have to, bring your own wood to get burnt. And that was quite common too. No one needed to pay for the for the wood. So you just took your own house to do that.
I'm curious about the rituals that we observed in the performance. I don't know if either the company or you would like to comment on what aspects of what we saw in the performance resemble things that people were accused of, or that people, or that exist in folk tradition.
Okay, I could start with what I recognized like this, and then, for one thing, as I saw it, the women were in the performance were making a biara. A biara was a witch hair who witches could make out of a piece of cloth, blood, hair, nails, other disgusting things, and then with a little help of the devil. And then they could send the biara to the neighbors' cows, and the hair milked the cows and then came back home and vomited up the milk in a suitable hink. A bucket. Yes, bucket. And and also all those beliefs in that nails and hair and blood and spit is very strong material when you are trying to use magic. So you have to, if you don't want to be used by a witch, you have to hide when you cut your nails or your hair, you have to, bury it in the ground or throw it in the fire or something like that, so no witch get their hands on it. And also this there was something so very physical, of course, in the performance that really talked to me, or really touched me, and I think that is because it was in the trials, you had to take your clothes off when you were when they searched for devil's marks. So you had to stand in front of the whole court and half of the communion, and everybody saw you naked without clothes. But also, I think that's about misogyny too, that the body is, especially the woman body, is so uncontrollable and magic, and you know, has its own agenda that you can't control, and you can't do anything about it. I think that's the really main fear for people. Okay, I don't know what time is it, but okay. Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understood you right, but did you say that there was in 100 years before this Karen's witch trial, there were no trials in Åland Island, but
no executions, no.
But
and
why?
Why? Because
perhaps I can read it from your book. I'm going to read it now.
Okay, because the law in Sweden, the king in Sweden changed the law in 1608. In 1608, Sweden and also then Finland and Åland, in fact, got Sharia laws. After that, they started to judge by the Bible. And the Bible says that you shall not let a witch live. So after 1608, the law changed and the sentences changed, and it was much harder to be a woman and to be accused of being a witch after 1608.
Okay.
It's important to know.
Yes,
before that, it was not that dangerous that it was after.
Yeah, that was the explanation.
Yes, and also sometimes we have, you have heard that the Spanish Inquisition was so really hard, but the Inquisition was better than the courts here, because the Inquisition had to stick to the law and didn't want to convict people. But here, the courts, they didn't always stick to the law. In Åland, they didn't. For example, they weren't permitted to use torture, but they did anyway. So the Spanish Inquisition was better than the courts in Åland and Finland. Okay, anything else? Yeah?
I'm not sure if I heard this from you or someone else, but remember something about like witches, like how in Finland or in Åland, witches and the connection with like cows
Yes.
was like very like strong. Like,
Yes.
like can you tell us about that?
Yeah. The cows were, of course, very important to stay alive. You could be very poor and still you had one cow. And also, they didn't get enough food. Of course, people didn't, so the cows did even less get enough food. And they were, a very important economic factor aspect. And the cows gave milk, and milk is kind of sacred almost in some way. It also gave butter, and butter you could sell, and you could get cash, money. That wasn't very common either. And well, I think it's just because cows were so very important in the society, and also there is a connection, it still is on Åland, I don't know about the rest of Finland, but in Åland the cow is the woman's animal. If you have a farm, the men keeps the horses and the women keeps the cows. So they were connected to each other, the women and the cows. And they used butter for magical reasons too. There is one, for example, a common sorcery was to put butter on the teeth of the mouth or the cow to heal, and salt and butter often, to give something back. I think it was about that, to give something back to the cow, so for all it gave to the family. When I talk about these women, I always like to say out their names. I think it's important. It's in fact important because of this, that the men who killed them still have their names in the churches and their art pieces hanging around everywhere with their names on it. And I would like to do so also today. So, in Åland Islands there were 7 women who were executed. And that was Karin Persdotter from Enkarby, Maria Nilsdotter from Markusböle, the widow of Mats, Ebba from Fimby, Lisbeta, the wife of Per Skarp in Persnäs, Anna Bengtsdotter i Högbollsta, Ingeborg Olsdotter i Västansunda, Margreta Mårtinsdotter i Norrby. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Tusen tack. Tyvärr inte, alltså jag tänkte dumt nog inte så långt. Men